A knot of unease tightened in Aaliyah's stomach. She was a cautious driver, acutely aware of her responsibilities on and off the bench. She pulled her late-model sedan smoothly to the curb, hands steady on the wheel, though her pulse had quickened. Officer Kevin Baxter approached her window, his silhouette large and imposing against the nascent light. His movements were slow, deliberate, a study in casual authority that immediately set Aaliyah on edge. She rolled down her window, the cool morning air doing little to soothe the sudden prickle of apprehension. "License and registration, ma'am." Baxter's voice was flat, devoid of any professional courtesy. His gaze lingered on her a moment too long, taking in her sharp business attire, her intricately braided cornrows, a hairstyle that was both a statement of her heritage and a source of quiet pride. Aaliyah handed over her documents, her expression neutral. "Is there a problem, officer?" Baxter took his time examining her license, his eyes flicking up to meet hers, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Aaliyah Denise Hayes," he read aloud, drawing out her middle name with a deliberate, almost mocking emphasis. "123 Peachtree Lane. Driving a nice car for this neighborhood, wouldn't you say, ma'am?" The insinuation, subtle but sharp, was not lost on Aaliyah. "I'm on my way to work, officer," she stated, her voice firm but polite. "And I believe I was observing all traffic laws." "We'll be the judge of that," Baxter retorted, the smirk widening slightly. "You know, you're kind. You all seem to be in such a hurry these days." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. The vague, coded language was a familiar sting. She chose her next words carefully. "Officer, if I have committed an infraction, please issue the citation so I can be on my way. I have a very important hearing this morning." This assertion of her schedule, her importance, seemed to flick a switch in Baxter. His eyes narrowed. "Oh, an important hearing, is it? Think you're a little too important to follow the rules of the road like everyone else?" He leaned closer, his breath fogging the air. "Maybe you need to be reminded who's in charge out here." Before Aaliyah could process the shift in his demeanor, before she could even formulate a response to the escalating aggression, he barked. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. We're going to conduct a random drug search." "A drug search?" Aaliyah's voice was incredulous, laced with a rising anger she struggled to contain. "On what grounds, officer? This is harassment. And resisting an officer, are we judge?" Baxter sneered, his hand dropping to the butt of his service weapon in a deliberately menacing gesture. The air crackled with unspoken threat. Aaliyah knew this was spiraling out of control, knew the danger signs. But the blatant injustice, the sheer audacity of his fabricated pretext, was a raw insult. As she reached for her door handle, a cold resolve hardening within her, her other hand moved almost instinctively towards her phone, resting on the dashboard. She tapped the screen, the camera app silently activating, angling it as best she could. The moment she stepped out, Baxter was on her, his movements quick and rough. "I told you this neighborhood has rules," he growled, his face inches from hers. And then, the unthinkable. From a pocket on his utility belt, he produced a small, gleaming pair of scissors. Not standard police issue, something sharper, more personal. "What are you doing?" Aaliyah gasped, her mind reeling, trying to comprehend the sudden, bizarre turn of events. With a vicious tug, Baxter grabbed one of her meticulously braided cornrows. "This kind of hairstyle," he hissed, his voice thick with a contempt that went far beyond any traffic violation, "isn't fitting for a law-abiding citizen. Maybe you need to rethink how you present yourself." Snip. The metallic sound, sharp and final, cut through the morning air, severing more than just hair. Aaliyah felt a sickening lurch as a thick, 3-inch section of her braid, a piece of her carefully constructed identity, fell to the pavement. She stared at it, then at Baxter, a maelstrom of shock, fury, and a profound, sickening sense of violation churning within her. She rolled down her window, the cool morning air doing little to soothe the sudden prickle of apprehension. "License and registration, ma'am." Baxter's voice was flat, devoid of any professional courtesy. His gaze lingered on her a moment too long, taking in her sharp business attire, her intricately braided cornrows, a hairstyle that was both a statement of her heritage and a source of quiet pride. Aaliyah handed over her documents, her expression neutral. But for Judge Aaliyah Hayes, the dawn had been irrevocably, brutally fractured, and the camera on her dashboard, she prayed, had captured enough of the aftermath. Baxter walking away, his patrol car's license plate, to prove it. Aaliyah drove to the Fulton County Courthouse in a daze, the phantom sensation of cold steel against her scalp, a persistent torment. The severed braid lay on the passenger seat, a tangible piece of the morning's violation. Each stoplight, each turn, brought her closer to a place where she was supposed to dispense justice, yet she herself had just been so profoundly wronged. Her chambers offered a brief, sterile sanctuary. Staring into the mirror, the damage was stark. A ragged gap in the intricate pattern of her cornrows, impossible to fully conceal. She did her best, tucking and pinning the remaining braids, a futile attempt to restore a semblance of her usual composed appearance. The physical cut was small, but the invisible wound it represented, the blatant disrespect, the racial and gendered animosity, ran deep. Morning, Judge Hayes. The prelims for the State versus Peterson are set for 9. Sarah, her ever-efficient clerk, poked her head in, oblivious to the storm raging beneath Aaliyah's carefully constructed calm. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right out," Aaliyah replied, her voice remarkably steady. She took one last look at her reflection, squaring her shoulders. She was a judge. She had a duty. She would not let Baxter's thuggery derail that. Presiding over the morning session was an exercise in compartmentalization. She listened to arguments, ruled on objections, her legal mind sharp and focused. Even as a part of her reeled from the assault, the weight of the judicial robe felt heavier today, a stark contrast to the vulnerability she had experienced just hours before. During the lunch recess, she finally allowed herself to confront the full impact of the morning. She locked her chamber door and immediately called Imani Washington. Imani arrived like a force of nature, her usual boisterous energy instantly replaced by a simmering fury as Aaliyah recounted the incident, her voice finally cracking with emotion. The severed braid, placed on Aaliyah's desk, seemed to radiate malice. "That animal," Imani spat, her eyes blazing. "This isn't just misconduct, Aaliyah. This is a targeted assault. The scissors, that's premeditated. He intended to humiliate you, to violate you in a way that was personal and demeaning." "Ugh," Aaliyah nodded, the rawness of the experience still overwhelming. "The phone. I got the camera on, but I don't know what it caught." They huddled over Aaliyah's phone, hearts pounding. The video started with Aaliyah stepping out of the car. Baxter's back was mostly to the camera as he confronted her. His words were muffled by street noise and his position. Then, his arm moved. The crucial, sickening snip of the scissors was obscured by his body. The video only clearly captured him turning a dark shape and walking back to his cruiser, the license plate briefly visible before he drove off. "It's not enough," Imani said, her voice tight with frustration. "It shows him there. It shows his car. It shows something happening, but it doesn't unequivocally show him cutting your hair or his exact words. A good defense attorney will tear this apart, say he was just patting you down, that you're overreacting." The apparent smoking gun was far from it. The discovery that the scissors Baxter used were not standard police issue, but a smaller, almost specialized type, perhaps for cutting seatbelts, or, more sinisterly, something he carried for other purposes, added another layer of disturbing premeditation. But the video didn't capture that detail either. Aaliyah felt a fresh wave of despair. "So, it's still my word against his." "For now," Imani said, her jaw set. "But his actions, the type of scissors, if we can prove he carries those regularly for no official reason, that speaks volumes. And we have his badge number." We start digging into Officer Kevin Baxter. This can't be his first rodeo with this kind of behavior. The fight was just beginning. and their most promising piece of evidence was already proving to be a double-edged sword. The weight of the compromised video evidence and the sheer audacity of Baxter's attack led Aaliyah to Judge Elijah Sterling's door. She needed his wisdom, his perspective forged in the fires of a different, yet starkly similar, era of struggle. Judge Sterling listened in his characteristic thoughtful silence, his gaze fixed on Aaliyah as she recounted not just the assault, but also the frustrating ambiguity of her phone recording. He turned the small, bagged lock of hair over in his fingers, his expression unreadable. "The tools of oppression change, Aaliyah," he said finally, his voice a low, resonant baritone, but the intent often remains the same. Humiliation, degradation, an attempt to steal one's very essence. He paused. Officer Kevin Baxter. The name doesn't immediately ring a bell, but the behavior, that has a very familiar, very bitter echo. Aaliyah leaned forward. "You think he's done this before, Judge? I would be surprised if he hadn't," Sterling replied. "Men who wield power so recklessly, so personally, rarely do so in isolation. There are often whispers, rumors, unofficial complaints that never see the light of day, especially if the victims are perceived as powerless." He then shared a story from his early years as a lawyer, long before he wore a judge's robe. A case involving a young black activist whose home was repeatedly and randomly searched by a particular officer with a reputation for intimidation. No evidence was ever found, no charges ever stuck, but the harassment was relentless, designed to break the activist's spirit. "We never got that officer, Aaliyah," Sterling said, a shadow crossing his face. "The system protected him. The evidence was always circumstantial. Instead of offering a clear path forward for direct confrontation, Judge Sterling's counsel was unexpectedly and uncomfortably cautious. "Aaliyah," he said, his gaze direct, "your position as a judge, ironically, makes you both a powerful accuser and a vulnerable target. If you charge in all righteous fury without an ironclad case, they will use your position against you. They will paint you as vindictive, as abusing your authority. The chief judge here, Judge Harrison, he values order and the reputation of the city's institutions above all else. He has strong ties to the NOPD leadership. He will not look kindly upon one of his own judges creating a public spectacle that embarrasses the police, especially if your evidence is debatable." Aaliyah felt a knot of frustration tighten. "So I should just let it go? Because it's too risky? Because the chief judge might disapprove?" "Never let it go, child," Sterling said firmly. "But you must be strategic. A wounded lion is still a lion, but a cunning fox often outlives it. Baxter may have a pattern. You and Imani must find it. Find other victims. Find irrefutable proof of his malice, not just against you, but against others. Build your case in the shadows, gather your strength, and then, when the time is right, you strike, not just for yourself, but for all those whose stories were never heard." His words were a stark reminder of the institutional inertia and the internal politics she was up against. It wasn't just Baxter, it was potentially her own judicial superior she might have to navigate carefully. The fight was not only external, but could have serious internal repercussions. Armed with Judge Sterling's cautious but resolute advice, Aaliyah and Imani embarked on their clandestine investigation into Officer Kevin Baxter. The initial, furious desire for swift retribution was now channeled into a patient, meticulous search for a pattern, for other voices that might corroborate Baxter's abusive tendencies. Imani, leveraging her network within the city's legal aid clinics and community advocacy groups, began to discreetly inquire about Baxter. She framed her questions carefully, avoiding direct mention of Aaliyah's incident, instead asking about general complaints or unusual encounters involving an officer fitting Baxter's description and precinct. The first few weeks yielded little more than whispers and dead ends. Baxter had only been transferred to Aaliyah's district a few months prior, making it harder to find local patterns. His previous precinct was in a different part of the city, a neighborhood with a higher crime rate, and a population less likely to formally complain against the police, fearing retaliation or simply believing it futile. "It's like he's a ghost in his old stomping grounds," Imani reported to Aaliyah, frustration lacing her voice. "People remember an aggressive cop, maybe even a name that sounds like Baxter, but no one has a clear story. No one filed a formal complaint that stuck." End of her. Aaliyah, meanwhile, spent her evenings poring over online forums, community message boards, and heavily redacted public records related to police conduct in Baxter's former precinct. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but she was driven by a cold, methodical anger. Then, a faint trace emerged. Imani managed to connect with a retired public defender who had worked extensively in Baxter's old precinct. The lawyer, a weary man named Arthur Chen, remembered Baxter, though not by name initially. "Yeah, there was this one guy," Chen recalled over a crackling phone line. "Real hothead. Liked to throw his weight around, especially with the younger guys. Had a nasty habit of confiscating small items during stops that never made it to the evidence locker. Nothing big enough to make a stink over usually, but it was a pattern. We called him the collector among ourselves. This was different from the barber nickname Officer Miller had mentioned in the previous story iteration, suggesting perhaps Baxter had multiple unsavory reputations, or that Miller's information was specific to a different context. This new lead, however, pointed towards a different kind of misconduct: petty corruption. "Did anyone ever file a formal complaint about these confiscations?" Imani pressed. Chen sighed. "A few tried, but it was always small stuff. A cheap watch, a few bucks, his word against theirs. The complaints always got lost or unsubstantiated. He was good at covering his tracks, or someone higher up was good at covering for him." Chen then mentioned something that made both Imani and Aaliyah sit up straighter. "There was one case, though. A young fella accused Baxter of planting a small baggie of marijuana on him after he couldn't find anything else during a stop. The kid had no priors. A good student. He fought it. We even had a sympathetic witness, a store owner who saw part of the stop from a distance. But then, the witness suddenly clammed up, refused to testify, said he misremembered. The case against the kid fell apart, but so did any chance of going after Baxter. The kid's lawyer at the time, a young woman, really driven, of grade. She was convinced the witness had been intimidated. The parallels were chilling. A potentially career-damaging accusation against Baxter, a key witness suddenly changing their tune. It felt uncomfortably close to what they feared might happen with Officer Ben Carter in Aaliyah's own potential fight. The powerful forces Chen alluded to weren't just an abstract concept. They had a history of silencing dissent. The information from Arthur Chen, while not directly related to an assault like Aaliyah's, painted a picture of an officer with a history of abuse of power and a knack for evading consequences. Aaliyah and Imani decided their next step was to try and find the lawyer who had represented the young man in that previous planting case, the driven young woman Chen had mentioned. It took some digging, but Imani eventually tracked her down. Her name was Sarah McCall, and she was no longer practicing law. She now ran a small, non-profit bookstore in a quiet neighborhood. When Imani and Aaliyah, introducing herself simply as a concerned citizen working with Imani, met Sarah, she was initially hesitant, her eyes clouded with a lingering weariness when Baxter's name was mentioned. "Officer Baxter," Sarah said, a bitter taste in her voice. "Yes, I remember him. And that case, it nearly broke me." She recounted the story, confirming Chen's version. Her client had been a bright kid, his future nearly derailed by a trumped-up charge. The store owner had been their star witness, clear and confident in his initial statements. Then, a few days before a crucial hearing, he had completely changed his story, suddenly unable to recall key details, his demeanor fearful. "I knew someone had gotten to him," Sarah said, her voice low. "He wouldn't say who, wouldn't even look me in the eye, just kept repeating he must have been mistaken. There were whispers, rumors about Baxter having friends in high places, connections within the department that went beyond his pay grade. Aaliyah felt a familiar coldness creep up her spine. "Did you ever try to report the suspected witness tampering?" Sarah gave a humorless laugh. "Report it to whom?" "The same department that was protecting him. I was a young lawyer. Idealistic. I made some noise. I wrote letters. And you know what happened? Suddenly, I started having bad luck. My car was vandalized. Twice. I got audited by the IRS. Anonymous, unsubstantiated complaints were filed against me with the Bar Association. Nothing ever stuck, but it was a constant barrage, designed to wear me down, to make me radioactive." She looked at Aaliyah. "They succeeded. I left the law. I couldn't take the poison anymore." This was more than just a blue wall of silence. This was active, aggressive retaliation. As Aaliyah and Imani were leaving the bookstore, shaken by Sarah's story, Aaliyah received a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Judge Hayes?" a polite professional voice asked. It was Captain Davies, a high-ranking officer within UPT, someone known to be a close associate of Chief Judge Harrison. Aaliyah had met him paru times at official functions. "Captain Davies," Aaliyah replied, her guard instantly up. "I heard through the grapevine, Judge, that you might be looking into an unfortunate interaction one of your constituents had with an officer," Davies said, his tone smooth as silk. "Purely unofficial, of course. But as someone who respects your position on the bench, I felt it my duty to offer a friendly word of advice. This Officer Baxter," Davies continued, his voice dropping slightly. "He's a good cop, Judge. A bit rough around the edges sometimes. Perhaps. But he gets results. The kind of results this city needs. Sometimes, in the heat of the moment, misunderstandings happen. It would be a shame if a minor incident, a personal grievance, were to be blown out of proportion and tarnish the reputation of a dedicated officer and by extension the department. And of course, one wouldn't want such a distraction to potentially affect a promising judicial career. The threat, though couched in polite, friendly terms, was unmistakable. It wasn't just Baxter they were up against. Captain Davies' call was a clear signal from higher up the NOPD food chain. They knew she was investigating, and they were warning her off. The blue wall wasn't just solid, it was actively pushing back. And it had powerful allies, potentially even reaching into the judicial circles her own chief judge inhabited. Captain Davies' friendly advice had the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of intimidating Aaliyah and Imani, it solidified their resolve. The blatant attempt at interference, the veiled threat to Aaliyah's career, was an insult to everything she stood for. "They think they can scare us off," Aaliyah said to Imani, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They think a quiet warning is all it takes. It means we're getting close to something they don't want us to see," Imani replied, a glint in her eye. "And it means we need to change tactics. Quiet digging isn't enough anymore if they're already watching us." Feeling cornered and increasingly frustrated by the official channels, Imani decided it was time to deploy a different kind of weapon. Public opinion, channeled through a less conventional route. She had a contact. A shadowy figure known only as Oracle in online activist circles. Oracle ran a popular, aggressively anti-establishment blog and social media platform that specialized in exposing police misconduct and corruption, often using leaked information and anonymous tips. It was a risky move. Oracle's methods were sometimes controversial, and their platform was known for its sensationalism. But right now, Aaliyah and Imani needed to create noise, to make it impossible for Baxter and his protectors to continue operating in the shadows. Imani carefully curated a package of information, a heavily anonymized account of Aaliyah's assault, referring to her only as a prominent Atlanta professional. Details of Baxter's known, though officially unproven, history of aggression and petty corruption from Arthur Chen and Sarah McCall's accounts, the suspicious circumstances of the previous witness intimidation, and a heavily blurred image of Baxter's patrol car license plate from Aaliyah's phone video. She sent it to Oracle through an encrypted channel. Within days, Oracle's platform exploded. Exclusive. Is this Atlanta cop a serial abuser? Victims fear retaliation as the collector or the barber roams free. The headlines were sensational. The tone accusatory. The articles detailed the allegations, carefully omitting any information that could directly identify Aaliyah as the most recent victim, but strongly implying a high-profile individual was involved. They included blurred sections of the license plate and called for anyone with information about Officer Kevin Baxter or similar incidents to come forward anonymously. The online response was immediate and intense. The story was shared thousands of times. Comment sections filled with outrage, personal anecdotes of negative police encounters, and demands for an official investigation. The hashtag number #ExposeBaxterATL started trending. The NOPD, caught off guard by the sudden, aggressive public campaign, reacted swiftly, but not in the way Aaliyah and Imani had hoped. Instead of launching a serious investigation into Baxter, they announced they were opening an internal inquiry into the leaks that led to Oracle's articles and into defamatory and unsubstantiated allegations against one of their officers. They issued a statement condemning irresponsible online vigilantism and warned of legal action against those spreading false information. Furthermore, a new anonymous complaint was suddenly filed with the Judicial Qualifications Commission against Aaliyah. The complaint, citing unverified online rumors, accused her of conduct unbecoming of a judicial officer by allegedly misusing her position to orchestrate a smear campaign against a decorated police officer following a routine traffic stop where she was reportedly uncooperative. The tables had been turned with vicious efficiency. Baxter was still on the street. And now Aaliyah, the victim, was facing an official inquiry that threatened her career and reputation, all based on a complaint clearly orchestrated by Baxter's allies in retaliation for the online expose. The silent uprising she and Imani had hoped to ignite had, for now, only brought the full weight of the system crashing down on her. The news of the Judicial Qualifications Commission, JQC, inquiry hit Aaliyah like a physical blow. It was a classic institutional counterattack. Discredit the accuser, protect the system. The anonymous complaint was a thinly veiled attempt to silence her, to make an example out of her for daring to challenge a police officer. Her initial shock quickly hardened into a cold, resolute anger. They had underestimated her. They think this will shut me up, Aaliyah said to Imani and Judge Sterling, her voice dangerously calm. They think they can intimidate a sitting judge with their dirty tricks. They're wrong. Judge Sterling, his face a mask of grim understanding, nodded slowly. This is their playbook, Aaliyah. When cornered, they lash out. The JQC investigation, while baseless, is a serious threat. You need impeccable legal representation for that, separate from Imani's efforts regarding Baxter. He offered to make some calls, to connect her with a lawyer experienced in defending judges against such politically motivated complaints. Imani, meanwhile, was already strategizing. This changes things, she said, pacing Aaliyah's chamber. The NOPD's internal review of Baxter is clearly a sham if this is how they respond to public pressure. Oracle's campaign created noise, but now we need to give that noise a face. A credible voice they can't easily dismiss or intimidate. The consensus was clear. Aaliyah could no longer remain an anonymous, prominent professional. The NOPD and Baxter's allies had forced her hand. It was time for her to step out of the shadows and tell her story, directly and publicly. The risk was enormous. Chief Judge Harrison would undoubtedly be furious. Her career could be irreparably damaged by the JQC inquiry, regardless of its outcome. But the alternative, to be silenced, to allow Baxter to continue his reign of abuse, to let the system win, was unthinkable. A coalition of respected civil rights organizations, already energized by Oracle's platform and deeply concerned by the retaliatory JQC complaint, offered to host a press conference. This wouldn't be an anonymous leak. This would be Judge Aaliyah Hayes, in her full capacity, speaking her truth. The day before the scheduled press conference, Aaliyah received an unexpected visitor in her chambers, Chief Judge Harrison himself. His demeanor was icy, his words clipped. He didn't threaten her directly, but the implication was clear. He spoke of the dignity of the bench, the importance of maintaining public trust in all city institutions, and the potential for irreparable harm if a judge were to engage in a public feud with the police department. He strongly, almost paternally, advised her to reconsider her course of action and to allow the established internal processes to run their course. It was a clear, high-level attempt to pressure her into silence, leveraging her own judicial superior. Aaliyah listened respectfully then, with a polite but unshakable firmness, informed Chief Judge Harrison that while she valued his counsel, she had a moral and ethical obligation to speak out against the injustice she had personally experienced and witnessed. The Chief Judge left, his displeasure palpable. Aaliyah knew she had crossed a significant line, potentially alienating a powerful figure within her own professional world. The established internal processes he spoke of were the very ones now being turned against her. The press conference was electrifying. Aaliyah, flanked by Imani and representatives from the civil rights groups, recounted her encounter with Officer Baxter with a calm, judicial precision that made her testimony all the more damning. She didn't raise her voice, didn't resort to histrionics. She simply laid out the facts, the humiliation, the abuse of power. She held up the small, clear bag containing the severed lock of her hair. "This is not just about a bad haircut," she stated, her voice resonating through the packed room. "This is about an officer of the law who felt entitled to violate a citizen, to demean her, to assault her, under the color of authority. And it is about a system that I fear is more interested in protecting its own than in serving the public it is sworn to protect." The impact was immediate and immense. A sitting judge accusing a police officer of assault and the department of a cover-up was unprecedented in Atlanta. Just as the Q&A session began, a young man pushed his way to the front of the reporters. "Judge Hayes, Judge Hayes," he called out, his voice urgent. "My name is Marcus Cole. I saw what happened. I was delivering papers that morning. I saw Officer Baxter with you. I saw him cut your hair." A stunned silence fell over the room, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. A live eyewitness, corroborating Aaliyah's most shocking claim, had just stepped into the inferno. The NOPD's carefully constructed narrative of a misunderstanding and an uncooperative Aaliyah was now facing its most significant challenge yet. Marcus Cole's public declaration was a bombshell. A young, seemingly credible eyewitness, with no apparent connection to Aaliyah, stepping forward to corroborate the most shocking part of her accusation. The haircutting sent the NOPD and Baxter's defenders scrambling. Imani immediately took Marcus under her wing, shielding him from the inevitable media frenzy and preparing him for the intense scrutiny that would follow. His initial statement, given to Imani and later to David Carter, the investigative journalist, was consistent and detailed. He described seeing Baxter's aggressive demeanor, Aaliyah's calm attempts to comply, and the shocking, swift act with the scissors. The NOPD, under immense public and now potential legal pressure, was forced to announce that their internal review of Officer Baxter would be re-evaluated in light of new information. Chief Judge Harrison, though privately furious with Aaliyah for defying his advice, could not publicly condone an assault on one of his own judges, especially with an eyewitness emerging. The JQC complaint against Aaliyah, while not officially dropped, was quietly put on the back burner. But the forces protecting Baxter were far from defeated. They launched a vicious, multi-pronged attack to discredit both Aaliyah and Marcus Cole. Anonymous online trolls, likely connected to pro-police groups or even Baxter's colleagues, began spreading anchor rumors. Aaliyah had a personal vendetta against Baxter from a previous unrelated encounter. False. Marcus Cole was a known troublemaker with a juvenile record. Partially true. A minor shoplifting charge when he was 14, which they twisted into something sinister. Marcus was being paid or coerced to lie. Officer Baxter, through his union lawyer, gave a series of carefully worded interviews, painting himself as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by an activist judge and a troubled young man looking for attention. He claimed the scissors were merely for cutting zip ties and that any contact with Aaliyah's hair was accidental during a struggle when she became irate and non-compliant. The labyrinth of lies was intricate and designed to confuse, to create doubt. Aaliyah found herself constantly defending her character, her motives. The stress was relentless. Sleep became a luxury. Her focus on her judicial duties, though she fought to maintain it, was undeniably affected. The critical juncture came during Marcus Cole's official deposition with NOPD Internal Affairs investigators, a deposition Imani had fought hard to ensure was recorded and had legal counsel present for Marcus. The lead investigator, a seasoned detective clearly allied with the old guard, subjected Marcus to a grueling hours-long interrogation. He twisted Marcus's words, brought up his juvenile record repeatedly, and insinuated that his memory was faulty or that he was seeking fame. Marcus, a young man unaccustomed to such high-pressure tactics, began to show signs of strain. He became flustered, his answers less confident. Then, the investigator produced a newly discovered piece of evidence. A grainy, time-stamped security photo from a gas station several blocks away from the incident, purportedly showing Marcus at the gas station around the exact time he claimed to be witnessing Aaliyah's assault. "Mr. Cole," the investigator said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "it seems your memory might indeed be a bit unreliable. Were you perhaps mistaken about what you saw, or even where you were that morning?" Marcus stared at the photo, his face paling. He stammered, confused. I don't understand that. That looks like me," but Imani immediately objected, demanding to know the source and authenticity of the photo. But the damage was done. The NOPD leaked the photo, and Marcus's hesitant response to a friendly media outlet. The headline screamed, "Key witness in Judge Hayes' case caught in lie. Alibi photo casts doubt on testimony." Aaliyah's heart sank. The photo, if genuine, completely torpedoed Marcus's credibility. Had he lied? Had he been mistaken? Or was this another, more sophisticated fabrication by Baxter's allies? The one piece of seemingly irrefutable human corroboration was now tainted, and Aaliyah was once again facing the prospect of her word alone against the might of the NOPD. The labyrinth of lies seemed to have no exit. The revelation of the gas station photo and the subsequent discrediting of Marcus Cole was a brutal blow. Public opinion, once firmly on Aaliyah's side, began to waver. The NOPD capitalized on the confusion, reiterating their narrative of a misunderstanding and an overzealous judge. Aaliyah felt the walls closing in, the weight of the system pressing down with renewed force. Even Imani, usually an unshakable optimist, was visibly shaken. "I don't get it, Aaliyah," Imani said, staring at a printout of the damning photo. "Marcus was so sure, so consistent. This photo, it just doesn't add up with what he told us, with what he saw." Judge Sterling, however, remained a pillar of calm amidst the storm. "Deception is a powerful tool, but it often leaves its own fingerprints," he mused during a late-night strategy session at his home. "This photo appeared too conveniently, too perfectly timed. We need to look beyond the image itself. Where did it come from? Who had access to that gas station's security footage? And why did it only surface now?" His words sparked a new line of inquiry. Imani, with her legal acumen, began to investigate the provenance of the photo. She subpoenaed the gas station for their complete, unedited security footage from that morning, not just the single still image the NOPD had leaked. She also started looking into the ownership of the gas station and any potential connections to NOPD officers or their associates. The process was arduous, met with bureaucratic delays and outright resistance, but Imani was relentless. Meanwhile, Aaliyah, though deeply disheartened, refused to succumb to despair. She focused on her judicial duties with a fierce, almost defiant professionalism. But in her private moments, the doubt gnawed at her. Had Marcus lied? Was she truly alone in this? Then, a breakthrough came from an entirely unexpected quarter. Officer Ben Carter, the young officer who had initially tried to corroborate Aaliyah's story and then faltered under pressure, reached out to Imani through a trusted intermediary. He was terrified, his career on the line, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent any longer. The photo of Marcus Cole at the gas station, Carter confessed, his voice barely a whisper in a clandestine meeting arranged by Judge Sterling. It's real. He was there. But not when they said he was. Carter revealed a sickening truth. He had been part of a small group of officers, loyal to Baxter, who had been tasked with finding dirt on Marcus Cole. After he came forward, they had painstakingly scoured hours of security footage from various locations Marcus frequented. They found the gas station image, which showed Marcus buying a coffee much earlier that morning, well before Aaliyah's incident. But they had then, Carter admitted with shame, digitally altered the timestamp on the still image provided to Internal Affairs and leaked to the press, making it appear as though Marcus had an alibi for the time of Aaliyah's assault. It was a deliberate, sophisticated act of evidence tampering designed to destroy Marcus's credibility and Aaliyah's case. Carter, racked with guilt and fearing he would eventually be implicated, had managed to secretly copy the original, unaltered footage from the gas station, as well as some internal NOPD emails discussing the Cole problem and the need to neutralize him as a witness. He handed a flash drive containing this explosive evidence to Imani. I can't testify publicly, Carter pleaded. They'll destroy me. But this is the truth. Baxter and his friends, they fabricated that alibi. The revelation was staggering. It wasn't just witness intimidation. It was a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, involving evidence tampering at a high level. This new evidence, the original footage and the internal emails, was far more damning than anything they had before. It didn't just support Aaliyah's claim against Baxter. It exposed a rot that went far deeper within the NOPD. The light at the end of the tunnel wasn't an exit. It was the headlamp of an oncoming train of federal intervention, if they could just get it on the right tracks. The flash drive from Officer Ben Carter felt like a live grenade in Imani's hand. The original, unaltered gas station footage, clearly showing Marcus Cole at a time that didn't conflict with his witnessing Aaliyah's assault, coupled with the internal NOPD emails discussing the need to neutralize him, was dynamite. It was proof of a conspiracy, of evidence tampering, of a concerted effort to obstruct justice. But Carter was terrified to come forward publicly, and without his direct testimony linking the altered photo to specific individuals within NOPD, the emails alone might be dismissed as circumstantial or taken out of context by a skilled defense. They were at a dangerous crossroads. We can take this to Internal Affairs, Imani said to Aaliyah and Judge Sterling. But after what happened with Carter's initial testimony, and knowing how deep this rot goes, can we trust them to act on it impartially? They might just bury it deeper, or worse, use it to identify and further retaliate against Carter. Judge Sterling, his expression thoughtful, proposed a bolder, far riskier strategy. Internal Affairs is compromised, or at least, we can't be certain it isn't. The city's oversight board has limited power. This needs a bigger fire to cleanse it. You need to go federal, Aaliyah. But even the feds can be complicated. He alluded to Aaliyah's earlier, unsettling discovery about a potentially compromised FBI agent. Aaliyah knew what he was implying. They couldn't just hand this evidence over to the local FBI field office without a guarantee it wouldn't be intercepted or diluted by internal politics or misplaced loyalties. There's a journalist, Judge Sterling said after a moment. Eleanor Vance, national investigative reporter, fearless, tenacious. She owes me a favor from way back. If anyone can light a fire under the right people in D.C. and ensure this evidence doesn't get buried by some local arrangements, it's her. It was an immense gamble, going to a national journalist with uncorroborated allegations from a terrified anonymous officer. Carter still refused to be named publicly at this stage, and internal emails of uncertain provenance was a high-wire act. If Vance didn't find the story credible, or if her investigation hit a wall, Aaliyah's reputation could be further shredded. But if she did run with it, and if it gained national traction, Aaliyah took a deep breath. "Let's do it," she said. "We've come too far to play it safe now." Imani, through Judge Sterling's carefully vetted channels, made contact with Eleanor Vance. The initial conversations were cautious. Vance was skeptical, as any good journalist would be. But the nature of the evidence, the clear disparity between the two gas station videos, the damning internal NOPD emails, even if their source was initially anonymous, and the fact that a sitting judge was the victim of the original assault, was too compelling to ignore. Vance launched her own discreet, high-level investigation, using her sources within the Department of Justice and Azerbaijani circles in Washington, D.C. She didn't focus solely on Baxter, but on the pattern of cover-ups, the evidence tampering, and the potential involvement of higher-ranking NOPD officials in the conspiracy to discredit Marcus Cole and, by extension, Aaliyah. The resulting exposé, published simultaneously by Vance's national news organization online and in print, was a bombshell. It wasn't just about Officer Baxter and a bad haircut anymore. It was about a calculated conspiracy within the Atlanta Police Department to fabricate evidence, silence witnesses, and obstruct justice, potentially involving supervisory personnel. The article named names, those implicated in the emails, under strict journalistic sourcing rules, detailed the evidence tampering with the gas station photo, and raised serious questions about the integrity of NOPD's internal affairs. The national outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Senators called for a federal investigation. The DOJ, already peripherally aware due to Judge Sterling's earlier, more discreet inquiries, could no longer afford to let the local FBI office handle it with kid gloves, especially with Vance's reporting highlighting potential internal conflicts of interest the compromised agent Aaliyah had suspected. A special task force from Main Justice in D.C. was announced, dispatched to Atlanta to take over the investigation into both Baxter's assault on Aaliyah and the subsequent conspiracy to obstruct justice. Officer Baxter, who had perhaps started to breathe a little easier after Marcus Cole's discredited testimony, now found himself in a far more terrifying spotlight. The allies who had protected him locally were powerless against a full-scale federal intervention. In a panic, Baxter made a series of mistakes. He attempted to contact other officers involved in the email chain, clearly trying to coordinate stories or destroy further evidence. These calls, now under federal surveillance, became fresh nails in his coffin. The gamble with fire had paid off, and the flames were now consuming those who thought they were fireproof. The federal investigation moved with a speed and thoroughness that stunned the NOPD. The Special Task Force from D.C. was a different breed, unermittlung and unswayed by local politics or the blue wall. They subpoenaed records, interrogated officers, and offered immunity to lower-level players in exchange for testimony against those higher up in the conspiracy. Officer Ben Carter, seeing the writing on the wall and now offered federal protection, finally agreed to testify openly about the evidence tampering and the pressure he had faced. His testimony, combined with the digital forensic analysis of the NOPD emails and the original gas station footage, built an irrefutable case. Officer Kevin Baxter was arrested, not just for the assault on Aaliyah, which, with Carter's now credible testimony and the national spotlight, was being pursued with new vigor by a specially appointed state prosecutor, but on federal charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice and witness tampering. Several other officers, including a lieutenant implicated in orchestrating the smear campaign against Marcus Cole and Aaliyah, were also indicted. Captain Davies, who had delivered the friendly warning to Aaliyah, was forced into early retirement under a cloud of suspicion. Chief Judge Harrison, while not directly implicated, faced intense criticism for his initial inaction and perceived attempt to protect the NOPD. The trial of Kevin Baxter was a media circus. Aaliyah, with immense courage, took the stand, recounting her ordeal with a quiet dignity that resonated more powerfully than any outburst of anger could have. Imani, by her side as a friend and observer, watched with pride. Marcus Cole, his name now cleared, also testified, his voice stronger, more confident. The verdict, when it came, was a victory, albeit a hard-won one. Baxter was found guilty on multiple counts, including the assault on Aaliyah, reclassified as a more serious charge due to the use of a weapon and the violation of civil rights, and the federal conspiracy charges. He received a significant prison sentence. For Aaliyah, the moment the guilty verdict was read was not one of elation, but of profound, weary relief. Justice, in a tangible form, had been served. But the cost had been immense. Her life had been turned upside down. Her privacy had been invaded, her character attacked. She had faced threats and intimidation. The JQC inquiry against her was eventually dropped due to lack of merit and overwhelming public support. But the process itself had been bruising. She knew her career as a judge in Atlanta might be impacted. She had made powerful enemies. Some colleagues would always see her as a troublemaker. But she also knew she had done the right thing. The outpouring of support from ordinary citizens, from other victims of police misconduct who finally felt heard, was a powerful affirmation. The city of Atlanta was forced into a period of painful self-examination. The federal investigation led to a consent decree mandating sweeping reforms within the NOPD, overseen by a federal monitor. It was the beginning of a long, arduous process of rebuilding trust between the police and the community. Years passed. The Azerbaijanis of the Baxter scandal slowly faded from the daily headlines, but its impact lingered, shaping the city and its institutions. Aaliyah Hayes continued to serve on the bench, her reputation for fairness and integrity not only intact but enhanced by her ordeal. She was a different judge now, wiser, more empathetic, with an unshakable understanding of the power imbalances that could corrupt even the most sacred halls of justice. Her anchor, which had once been a symbol of her violation, now grew back, and she chose to wear it in a new, short, natural style, a quiet statement of her resilience and self-possession. It was a reminder not of what had been taken from her, but of what she had reclaimed. She didn't become a vocal activist in the traditional sense, but her actions spoke volumes. She mentored young lawyers, especially women of color, encouraging them to be fearless in their pursuit of justice. She quietly supported community initiatives aimed at police reform and restorative justice. She established a small, privately funded fellowship to provide legal aid to victims of police misconduct who couldn't afford representation, a quiet tribute to the help she herself had received. The city's NOPD was a changed entity. The reforms were slow, often met with resistance from within, but the federal oversight and the constant vigilance of community groups ensured that progress, however incremental, was made. The culture of impunity had been dealt a significant blow. One crisp autumn afternoon, Aaliyah was presiding over her courtroom. A young, nervous public defender, a black woman much like Aaliyah herself had been years ago, was passionately arguing a motion to suppress evidence in a case involving a questionable police stop. The young prosecutor, also relatively new, was presenting the state's case. Aaliyah listened, her expression thoughtful. She saw the familiar dynamics at play, the weight of the state versus the rights of the individual. She asked probing questions, ensuring both sides were thoroughly heard. As she considered her ruling, her gaze drifted for a moment to the Atlanta skyline visible through the tall courtroom windows. The city was still there, still vibrant, still imperfect. The fight for true justice was, as Judge Sterling had often said, never truly over. But as she looked back at the young defense attorney, who despite her nervousness was arguing with skill and conviction, Aaliyah felt a sense of profound hope. The silence had indeed been shattered, not just by her own voice, but by the chorus of voices that had risen with her. The echoes of that struggle were still resonating, inspiring a new generation to demand accountability, to fight for a more just world. Her gavel came down, not with a thunderous crash, but with a firm, decisive tap. "Motion to suppress is granted in part," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "The court finds that while the initial stop was justified, the subsequent search exceeded the permissible scope." She continued, her words carefully chosen, rooted in law but informed by a wisdom born of experience. The legacy of her ordeal wasn't just in the reforms enacted or the officers brought to justice. It was in the quiet, persistent work of ensuring that every person who entered her courtroom, and hopefully every citizen on the streets of her city, was treated with the dignity and fairness they deserved. The fight continued, one case, one ruling, one small act of courage at a time, and Aaliyah Hayes, marked but unbowed, was ready for it.